we're told by the Prime Minister this is because the listeners, your constituents in Saffron Walden, shouldn't have to bear the cost. How have you got to that? Not you personally. How has this cost been reached? You don't know how they've got to it. They've just plucked a figure out of the air, have they?
Well, which specific cost are you talking about?
£15,000 for the average household. That is the saving by not imposing these taxes at the rate that was initially envisaged. And I don't seem to be able to find out how not you personally, how the government have come to that figure.
Well, I'm sure I can get you the detail of that. Those costs aren't created by the business department. Well, but there would have been economists in the energy department who would have looked at that and come to an analysis.
These changes, they don't really help the poorest in society, a lot of people would argue. The poorest in society aren't fretting about when they're going to replace their car with an electric car because the poorest in society don't drive in this country. The poorest in society are not worried about installing a heat pump.
I'm so sorry, but that is a ludicrous statement. If you step outside of London, come to my constituency, you will find the poorest in society drive because they live in a rural area. These rules, no. What you said is actually quite astonishing.
It is not astonishing. A third of the country doesn't drive. A third of the country doesn't own cars.
People who live in cities will be able to deal with this in a way that is quite different from people who live in towns and rural areas. We need to think about everybody, not just the metropolitan bubble.
There are poor people that live in cities across the country. This has nothing to do with an urban bubble and metropolitan London.
I'm afraid
I live in the countryside and I come from Newcastle.
Well, I'm afraid that my constituents raise these concerns all the time.
Is this about pleasing focus groups, feeling voters, or is this about something he genuinely believes is the right thing to do?
It's about being honest with people. It's about being honest.
So he wasn't honest with people a week ago.
Lots of people. No, he hasn't changed the commitment to net zero.
Yes, he has.
Being honest with people.
No, but he has changed.
Julia, let me finish. Julia, no, we're still committed. It's how we're doing it in a fair and proportionate way.
Just a few months ago, we had ministers on this programme committing to these targets of 2030. What's happened in those last few months?
Well, what's happened, these are discussions that have been taking place. We haven't wanted to announce on anything until we were absolutely sure. And what's happened is that now is the right time to make the announcements. Now we are sure.
So for those ministers that came on and then stood by those promises and stood there when they were asked about them just a few months ago, it's really embarrassing, though, because they was there saying, absolutely, we are committed to these targets. And now a couple of minutes later, everything's shifting.
Well, many of those ministers will now have information which they didn't have at the time.
What about those who are poor and living in rented homes in cities or in the countryside who are now not going to get their heating upgraded by their landlord because of this?
That is not what the policy is. We haven't said that there should be no heating upgrades. What we have said is that people won't be forced to change the type of boiler that they have before a certain date. They will still have those. And in fact, what this is doing is making it easier for them because they won't necessarily have to take a more expensive option that might actually be less practical.
The SMMT, that's the motor industry, the car manufacturers' trade body, they said the message is incredibly confusing for consumers. The boss of Climate Change Commission says we as a country weren't on track to meet any of these targets, even before this announcement. We have to do more, but we're watering down those previous commitments. The RAC saying we're slowing down both the momentum the motor industry has built up in switching to electric. Are they all wrong?
I spoke to the chair of the Society of Motor Manufacturers yesterday. We had a good conversation. He told me that he understands why the government is doing this.
Let me take you to the Conservative Party. Sir Alok Sharma, who you'll know well, says this decision, quotes, is incredibly damaging for business investment. Now Lord Goldsmith, Rishi Sunak's, and I now quote, short stint as PM will be remembered as the moment the UK turned its back on the world and on future generations. A moment of shame. So, the donors don't like it, some of the car industry don't like it, even your own members don't like it, Kemi Badenoch.
Well, I disagree. Not everybody has the kind of money that...
Nick,
let me finish, please. Nick, let me finish. You have chosen negative comments. There are lots of Conservative MPs who are speaking very positively about this. So you're only giving one view.
This is cynical beyond belief. The Prime Minister is pretending to halt frightening proposals that simply do not exist. He's doing it to turn the environment into a US-style political wedge issue, something the UK has avoided all my political life. Sunak is chucking the environment into a political fire purely to score points. It is reprehensible. That's from a Conservative.
Yeah, I know Zach Goldsmith very well. He is a friend. I fundamentally disagree. Let me finish. I fundamentally disagree with what he has said. we are listening to the concerns people are raising with us. Most people in this country don't have the kind of money that he has. We have to think about what people can reasonably afford.
You're implying because Lord Goldsmith is very rich, he's possibly out of touch with ordinary people. I remind you, at the last Sunday Times Rich list, Rishi Sunak was the 222nd richest man in this country. So he's completely out of touch as well, because he enjoys similar wealth to Lord Goldsmith.
Yes, but they're doing quite different things.
One thing having a target, that 2050 target, but if we don't have the tools to reach it, what is the point of that target?
Well, my response to them would be that the tools which they are pushing, which people can't afford, aren't going to get to that target either. If people can't afford to do things, then they're not going to be able to make those changes. The sort of policies that the Green Party is pushing would mean that nobody would be driving and nobody would be heating their houses. Yeah, you can get to net zero that way, but that would be a bonkers way to do it. And we are not supporting that. We're going to do this in a way that is fair and proportionate and that has the consent of the British people.
But why did he come out and say that he's now going to scrap a meat tax, that nobody should have to have 7 bins? Was there ever a government policy to impose a meat tax? What was he actually scrapping there?
These were proposals that had come out from the Committee on Climate Change. So we have a committee called the CCC, which informs almost all of the policy that comes into reality.
But it was one of many policies that didn't go ahead.
We are meant to be world leaders, or at least aspire to be. Why does the Prime Minister seem to think that simply bringing the UK into line with some countries is better than punching above our weight?
We have to do what is right for the UK. Al Gore is not a politician in the UK. Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of the UK. I've told you that we as a government have looked at this very carefully. We haven't rushed these announcements. It's not because of any political ploy or any by-election. We've been looking at the numbers. We've been looking at the dates. We've been looking at the macro environment. You look at what's happening with energy costs, Russia's war in Ukraine.
You talk about giving us the tools to reach those targets. You've just changed the goalposts on some of them. What are the tools we should be focusing on right now?
Yes, but the tools are still there. We've made some changes to make them. Well, the electric vehicle mandate, for example, that's one of them. That's the big one which people are complaining about. That tool is still there. On the previous show that I was on, people were criticising us for not following the Climate Change Committee's advice. The 7 bins was in the Environment Act 2021. So there are lots of bits of policy which we're looking at again, and we just don't think that the public will be able to wear these things.
So it was actually 7 bins? I thought it was 7 streams of recycling.
7 streams of bins, 7 streams, 7 bins.
Mr Sunak once said he'd find it difficult to look his daughters in the eye if we were to row back on that. Can you look your children in the eye as their mother and say you're doing the right thing for them and future generations?
Yes, absolutely. Because if
is it a lively topic among your children, might I ask?
It actually isn't. You know, one of them just turned 4 yesterday.